Hello, welcome again, everybody. This is episode 4 for the week ending October 23rd. And as usual, a lot has gone on in the crypto and blockchain space. And I'm on again with Jason Myers, who's the lead architect at AuditChain. And today I thought we would, first of all, how are you doing, Jason? Welcome.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. I'm actually looking forward to this discussion, so I really want to hear what your thoughts are. I'm sure the community will enjoy this discussion. We're going to talk about a piece that initially I came across. Fortune wrote a piece on that was titled "Sam Bankman-Fried, Erik Voorhees, and the Battle for Crypto's Soul," which I thought was a bit dramatic. However, reading the article and the 2 blog posts that it references, I thought, indeed, you've got Sam Bankman-Fried on one side, who's the founder of FTX crypto exchange, and that exchange is custodial. And, so it's a financial intermediary holding billions of dollars of customers' money and personal information, and it is regulated. And then on the other side, you've got Erik Voorhees, a libertarian, founder of Shapeshift. And Shapeshift recently, I guess over the last maybe 12 months, has migrated from a for-profit centralized corporation to a DAO, or is in the process of doing that and dissolving into a community-owned and driven organization. So they have two very different contexts and interests and lenses from which they view how the crypto world needs to move forward. So they covered, Sam Bankman-Fried wrote a blog post he titled "Possible Digital Asset Industry Standards." And then Erik Voorhees wrote a rebuttal titled "A Response to SBF and Principled Crypto Regulation." So I'll put the links to both blog posts in the description. I think it's a worthy read, but I thought I would start by having Jason share his point of view. They covered a vast number of topics, so I just picked out a few, and I thought we would kind of have a discussion about it. So the first one was around hacks and accountability. They both seem to be in agreement that there needs to be regulation and standards, although Erik wanted to make it clear that people understand the difference between standards and regulation. So I think that's my first question for you, Jason. What is the difference from your experience, and what's the difference between standards and regulation, and how should people be thinking about it in the context of crypto and blockchain technology?
Well, regulation is prescriptive, right? And standards are principled, right? For instance, you have, it may not be related, but it's an example. JPEG is a standard. Everybody now knows what a JPEG is, right?
Right.
JPEG is a standard. There is a standards organization that sets the standard for for JPEG, right?
Yeah.
And in a regulations, a regulator writes prescriptions. You have to do this, that, and the other thing, and then they write prescriptions on what you cannot do.
Right.
So it's more prescriptive, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think one of the points that Erik was trying to make was around the enforcement. Like, enforcing standards and enforcing regulations are very different, right?
That's true. But I think in this context, enforcing a standard, if the industry or a large part of the industry adopts a standard, if you don't follow the standard, then you won't be part of the community.
Yeah, you put yourself out of business, essentially.
Right? Or you've got to go build a new community and set your own standards, right?
Right.
The standard is everything. It's not a dictatorship, a standard.
Yeah.
It's a very democratic process.
Right.
So everyone comes together and they agree on a standard, right? This
Yeah.
is what everybody agrees that the industry should do, or this is guidelines as to what actors in the space should do, right?
Right.
It's very democratic.
Right. So we've seen that in the tech space with like, Blu-ray, which was a sort of minimally adopted standard, and then other standards sort of surpassed that as there was more consensus in a broader group. Same thing with USB ports, etc. So those of you who might not be in the tech space, that's kind of what folks are referring to. So the crypto space needs standards, but they're not things that the government enforces. They are what the industry sort of builds consensus around.
Yeah, well, another example of a standard is a shipping container.
Right.
It's a standard length, width, and height, and they have these grooves, right? So that those shipping containers can go anywhere in the world, be taken off the boat, and be put onto a tractor trailer, right? So
Right.
ISO defines the standard size and specifications of a shipping container, right? That's another example.
Right. And so it does behoove us, I guess, to be a little bit more thoughtful around regulations, because Erik's point around regulations is that the way you enforce regulations is with force, like is with the law. Is he used language that was a little bit more strong than I would, but essentially violence, right? So as we're deciding what the regulations should be around crypto, we need to be very thoughtful because they're different than standards. So as it relates to hacks and accountability and how we deal with—
Well, hold on 1 second.
hackers.
Wait 1 second. I've never heard of, at least not in civilized countries, violence being used during an enforcement action, unless it was a criminal enforcement action and there was a resistance by the perpetrator to submit to custody by law enforcement officials.
Correct.
I'm going to make something very clear. The other thing that needs to be clear is that the SEC and the ESMA, those are administrative agencies. They are not criminal agencies, right? They have their own enforcement division, right?
Right.
If you've done something criminal, then there could be two cases. One for the administrative, right? The SEC can charge you with violation of securities laws, right?
Right.
But if they found that you actually committed fraud in addition, and it becomes a criminal case, they will refer it to the Department of Justice. And there will be two cases, one for the SEC and the other for the DOJ to adjudicate, right? But
Right.
rarely is there, batons, guns, lasers, or anything like that, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the one of the sort of debates is like, how do you deal with and how do you classify hackers when they hack a business, and you're trying to create a standard for how the industry should deal with hackers, and you're trying to determine when you classify someone as a bad actor versus one who identified a weakness in the platform protocol and should be
clear.
rewarded. Like, when do you reward a hacker and when do you classify a hacker a bad actor?
Let's be clear. There are two types of hackers, right?
Yeah.
There are white hats and black hats.
Yeah.
Right? The black hats steal money. They are bank robbers, right? Only you're not robbing a bank, you're robbing an application or a smart contract or a wallet, right? Then there are white hats. White hats, and I won't mention any names, but they are James Bond of the crypto space.
Right.
The problem with being a white hat is, depending upon which jurisdiction you're in, there may be laws that say you cannot penetrate. It's criminal to penetrate a computer system,
Right.
so to speak, right? But they may notice something. And what these white hats do is they scan wallets and applications and smart contracts on Ethereum and other blockchains, Polygon and so on and so forth, for exploits or potential exploits, right? They have to be extremely quiet about it. It's got to be radio silent. So they have to plan this secretly, steal the money, and then give it back to the project, right? Because somebody could be listening on the other side for communications. How are you going to get a communication about an exploit to the project managers who are sitting with, $400 million in a contract with a hole in it?
Right.
How are you going to do that? Because if you communicate that, well, then those people have a chance to race and beat you to it.
Exploit it, yeah.
Be gone, right?
Yeah.
So this is a really controversial, I mean, I love it. This is better than a James Bond movie. I mean, white hat hackers are, they're needed in the space. I mean, they're indispensable. They really are indispensable, right? So just know that if you are a thief, if you're a black hat, there's white hats watching.
Right.
Right? And the white hats are going to try and find a way to beat you to it. Only the difference is they're going to return it. And yes, they want to tip for their work. They want to be tipped. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and then, you have some white hats that are actually security research experts, and they do smart contract audit. So they perform a rescue, and then they write a report about it, and they publish a report, right?
Right.
So, and that attracts business, right? Wow, these guys find this exploit, they save 400 million bucks. Maybe we should use, Trail of Bits or Peck Shield or, whoever it is.
Yeah. And it sounded like SBF was saying, let's standardize on the rewards for the white hats, and propose like a 5%, of whatever was stolen,
right,
to reveal the flaw, but standardizing around the reward.
Maybe.
And then also standardizing on how they classify the black hats. It was an interesting conversation. One of the things that came out of that conversation was this idea of sanctions, allow lists, block lists, blacklists, and the nuances around all of those. SPF made the point that using block lists versus allow lists of illicit funds essentially amounts to blacklists. In the internet space, we've been familiar with blacklists. We've used them when it comes to emails, et cetera, blacklisting certain, entities that are known for spamming. And I think the model could be similar in the crypto space. One of the things, what do you think about this notion of where the blacklist needs to be applied? Erik's point was that it needs to be applied at the company's software level, but not at the blockchain level. He basically, let me just sort of read what he said. Basically, it would be much easier if the blockchains themselves would block illicit funds, wouldn't it? That, my friends, is the road to ruin. That is the road to tyranny, ubiquitous surveillance, and the worst dystopian Orwellian financial system. Tell us how you really feel, Erik. He said, that is the road every CBDC will take. Crypto, true crypto, must be different, or it has no reason to exist. Immutability at the base layer is the raison d'etre. What do you think of this notion of the blacklist being applied at the software layer versus the blockchain?
Well, let me pose a few questions first, just to give us a rounded perspective. Air carries sound, right?
Right.
If there are a number of groups in a schoolyard and I yell something over to the other side to one of the groups and they don't like it, can they block the air that carries the sound? Yes or no?
No.
No. They may walk over and start a fight, which is to say there's a dispute.
Yeah.
Right? But you can't take away air. Now I'm going to take this a little further.
Okay.
On the internet, big tech companies have occupied all of the air. Facebook, Google, right?
Yeah.
And even Twitter, they've occupied all of the air.
Right.
These are for-profit companies, so their policies allow them to censor or block the free flow across the air of dialogue lodged by any one or group of people. Right?
Yeah.
Erik's point, which I agree with, sets a good precedent. And if you compare the analog with the digital, to the extent that you can block the air that carries sound, should also be the air that carries value at the base layer, that does not prohibit validation at the base layer. If you are a validator on the Ethereum blockchain and you don't like certain transactions, you can refuse to validate, but you have no right, in my own opinion, and to support Erik's theory, to censor and cause a wholesale blockade of the operation of on-chain activity, because that would be like blocking the flow of, that'd be blocking the air that carries sound. And that's First Amendment stuff, because he talks about the First Amendment in his dialogue, right?
Yeah.
And I've always thought that with what big tech has been doing, I think we're going to see a really big First Amendment case in the United States go to the Supreme Court, which deals with this very issue, right?
Yeah.
To the extent that I can yell across the street and that air can carry my sound to your ears should be the extent that that same ability exists in a digital environment. And I hope he's listening. Right?
Yeah, it sounds like, I think you're right about there is going to be a need for a big case that sort of drives some sort of clarity or some sort of precedence, because I see this as sort of also similar to what we're seeing in the social media space with, the need for, like, with people being deplatformed, censored, etc. And this notion of, can the internet be censored? Should you be able to censor the internet at the, at the broadest level? One of the things that he also mentioned, or that came out, was this notion of OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is a department within the US Treasury. And they have this blacklist of sanctioned entities. We've all, in business, we've all had to deal with, especially if you're in e-commerce, we've had to deal with these blacklisted organizations, especially if you're building a platform. I've had experience working for an organization that had employees both in Russia and Ukraine. And when the war started, and when there were sort of official sanctions against doing business in Russia, with Russia, etc., it wreaked havoc. Because there's a lot of companies that have leveraged, developers, because they have a lot of expertise in both those countries. And they literally had to move Russian employees out of the country in order to, maintain their business, which is a real challenge. So, Erik's point of view is that was in opposition to what SBF had said, who basically, he said, we need to respect OFAC and we need to respect their sanctions. And Erik's point of view is that those sanctions sometimes are unjust and unethical because they sanction whole countries. You know, he kept on bringing up Iran, which has like 18 million citizens. How can you sanction and prevent people from doing business with individuals? What do you think about this notion of blacklists against countries, and having that replicated in the blockchain space?
Well, first of all, that's not a crypto conversation, right? When the United States does not like what another country does, they impose economic sanctions on them, which is to say they go to war. Instead of using guns, they use money. And unfortunately, there are casualties in those wars, lots of them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he mentioned those girls in Iran who believe in freedom. Should they be subject to those sanctions just because their country, who they are protesting, by the way, is subject to sanctions imposed by the United States? It's not just the United States. When the United States imposes sanctions on a country, there are other countries that get coerced into imposing the same sanctions, right?
But you can't even support those girls. Like if you wanted to support them, you know, from a fundraising standpoint, you can't even, because they're considered covered, like as an individual, they're covered under the sanction that's been imposed on the country.
I'm not sure we're ever going to get over this wall, really.
Yeah.
But as far as it also being true in the crypto space, not at the base layer, blocking addresses, yes. That I think is an appropriate way to do it. There should be a standardized way to do it.
Yeah.
There should be a standardized number of hops in terms of the address before and after within the context of a transfer of value by a bad actor, right?
Right.
A subsequent address that received from the address in question is likely also going to be blacklisted, right?
Right.
But then how do you deal with mixers, right? Because those things turn into aerosol. How are you going to track aerosol?
Yeah.
And I use the term aerosol to give people the visualization that $50 million sent from one address to a mixer turns into an aerosol cloud.
Right.
Track God knows how many addresses who are the recipients of in order to obfuscate that, right?
Right.
Listen, in the corporate world, if an auditor can't get answers on the flow of funds in a particular transaction, they escalate. They either cite you, or if they run into a wall, they're legally obligated to withdraw from the engagement and, you know, write up a citation and file it with their oversight board, right? You know, that's just one example, but, you know, as far as speaking strictly about opinions regarding whether or not OFAC should exist, people say it shouldn't. And then there are those that say it should. And I'm not sure we're ever going to get over that wall.
Yeah.
And the only way to get over that wall is to build a bigger standing army than of all of the armies put together from every other nation. Right?
Seems to be a theme every week on this podcast, is if you don't like the regulations, particularly the federal ones, you better think about building a standing army, which is not realistic.
Fight back. Citizens have a right to vote in most countries. The problem is that governments have made democracies such an overwhelmingly burdened full-time job that most people throw up their hands. They don't even know what a primary is.
But okay, let me just push back and just make sure I understood what you're saying. And you know, it's
fight back is what I said. Fight back.
You're saying fight back, but you can't even support the fight back in this context because the whole country has been sanctioned. How do for example, if Ukraine had been sanctioned, Elon wouldn't be able to have supported them with Starlink
Hold on one second.
technology.
This might be naive to say,
Okay.
but I think in every country, the number of citizens outnumber the number of people in government and the military. Find them and remove them if you don't like what's going on in your country.
Well,
Otherwise, you're going to live a long, miserable death. Let me repeat myself. You're going to live a long, miserable death.
I mean, I think that's probably why we are in the crypto space, but I don't think it's naive to say that, but it's definitely
We're in the crypto space.
Easier said than done.
We're in the crypto space because the humans that run things have demonstrated a failure after failure after failure. And how do they repair it? With more actions that lead to more failure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So why put in between two endpoints the humanity that has proven to fail, right?
Yeah.
When I transfer money from a bank account to another bank account, you know how many, I look, and telephone connections are the same way. When I call from overseas to a US number, there are different companies that play a role in carrying that signal or switching the signal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Same with value. It's the same with value. And that's set up by rules and regulations. So anyway.
Good. No, good point. Well, speaking of failure, let's transition to what I thought would be a simple question that was asked in these blog posts, but turned out not to be. So was this notion of, what is a security? We've had a couple of conversations about this, and you've just been like, hey, the law has been made since 1936 by that gentleman. What's the name of the gentleman you mentioned all the time? The SEC, who invented the SEC?
Joseph Patrick Kennedy.
Yeah.
Whose son was John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, right?
Right.
Yes. Joseph Kennedy did things that would make most crypto scammers go, what? Yeah, when there were no rules.
But essentially, your point to some extent is that the securities laws have been established for a long time, and a lot of the questions we have in crypto can be answered by those laws. But anyway, so Sam Bankman-Fried proposed like a framework to decide what is a security and what isn't. And he described the decision tree that they're implementing at FTX. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. So the sort of three parts of the decision tree. The first is that their legal team will do an analysis of the asset according to the Howey test and other relevant law case and guidance. And if that analysis finds it to be a security, FTX US will treat it as such. And then the second point is that if it doesn't fall into the category of point number one, generally they'll treat it as a non-security commodity. And then if the SEC has actually adjudicated a case and then has found it to be a security, then they would make that adjustment. And then the third point is that if we do find an asset to potentially be a security, we will not list it in the US until there's such a process for properly registering it. I think a lot of the exchanges have kind of followed this model. And Erik seems to agree that this approach makes sense for FTX's business. But he went on a rant after that, asking the simple question, if the Howey test is so simple and easy, and I would pose this to you as well, Jason, if the law that was set by Kennedy has been so clear, then why hasn't the SEC published a list of even the top 20 stating which are securities and which ones aren't? If it's so simple and easy and there's already been established law, why haven't they done it for even the top 10?
First of all, if they create a list, it means they're rendering a legal opinion. The SEC does not do that. They will not do that, right? Your job is to hire a lawyer to analyze it. And based upon the assessment of a lawyer, if it's a security, the lawyer has a legal responsibility as an SEC gatekeeper to recommend that you file for an exemption from registration, or depending upon what your objectives are, file a full-blown S1 registration form with the SEC and prosecute it with the SEC, right? So we're going to get into some controversy here. First of all, you have to examine a point in time and a series of actions in order to determine whether or not securities laws need to be complied with, not whether a thing is a security. Whether or not a thing is a security is separate from having to comply when you initially offer and sell the thing, right? So when you offer and sell a thing for the first time, there are initial disclosure requirements. This is the Securities Act of 1933. It deals with new issues of securities. It deals with new additional issues with of the same class of security, right? So, and then the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 deals with ongoing disclosure thereafter the issuance, right? To keep investors informed. So if a thing is not a security, let's say I offer 500,000 clothespins to the public.
Yeah.
Clearly a clothespin is not a security, right? I mean, in my opinion, we're living in a weird time, but think about it for a second.
Well, what about an NFT?
Well, no, let me finish. No, I'm not going there yet. Let's stick with the clothes.
Okay.
Clothespins, okay?
Yeah.
Would you buy the clothes? What would be the first thing you saw if I were to offer you all or a portion of 500,000 clothespins?
I mean, it would depend on the clothespins.
Well, what's going to be your first question?
It's going to be like, how much do I, what's their value?
Okay, well, let's say we offer them at the same price that you can buy them at Home Depot. Then what's your next question?
Well, why don't I just buy it at Home Depot?
Right? What's another question?
Will would these appreciate in value? Like,
would they appreciate in value? That's correct. Would they appreciate? It's a fucking clothespin.
Right.
Is it going to appreciate in value? I mean, they're made out of wood. Some of them are, or plastic with that little metal hasp. I don't see the value of appreciation. I don't see future appreciation. So the question always boils down, why are you buying them in the first place?
Right.
Right? Not whether the thing is a security.
If it was a Tiffany clothespin versus a Home Depot clothespin.
But again, I can buy the Tiffany clothespin at Tiffany's.
Yeah.
Why should I buy it from you?
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
Why are you buying the clothespins in the first place? Now, if you're actually buying clothespins, if I'm offering clothespins and you and maybe 50 other people actually buy them, what are they going to use them for? That's another question. What are you going to use them for?
Yeah.
They're clothespins. Chances are you're going to hang up clothes so that they can dry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you prove in court that you bought them because you think they were going to appreciate? If you actually believe that 500,000 of these clothespins are going to appreciate in value when there's an unlimited supply at every Home Depot and God knows where else in the world,
yeah,
you are the stupid one. You are the stupid. You are the naive. You have been duped. right? So
Right.
now let's go to your NFT issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's say there is an offer of 100 JPEGs,
Yeah.
right? And let's put things in a proper perspective. They are JPEGs.
Yeah.
They just happen to be that one and only JPEG that is represented by a non-fungible token having a unique bit string on the
Yeah.
blockchain, an
Yeah.
address, right? So why are you buying it? If you're collecting it because you like the way it looks and they're,
Yeah, it's a unique design. I like it.
It's a
I'll be
unique
the only
design.
one that has that design.
well, let's look at, okay, so now let's turn the tables, okay?
Okay.
I have a bag full of 1974 baseball cards.
Yes.
They are made out of paper,
Okay.
right? I've got Jerry Kuzman, I've got Jerry Grody, I've got Dave Kingman, I've got
Yeah.
Luke Wilson, I've got Lee Mazzilli. I'm a Met fan, right?
Okay.
So I got Tom Seaver, right? I got Reggie Jackson, who played for the A's at that time.
Yeah.
And I offer them for sale,
Okay.
which people do all the time on eBay.
Yes.
Is that a security? Nope. You
Not
see?
not by current standards.
Yeah, see, okay.
Not by current standards against collectibles like baseball cards.
But if I'm buying a 19, okay, let's make it a little bit more. I'm buying a 1961 or 62 Roger Maris or Mickey Mantle baseball.
Yes.
And it's
a security.
Really good condition. No, it's not.
But I think it's you know it's going to appreciate in value because of what Roger Mantle did.
So how come, where was the SEC in 19, you know, where's the SEC? How come where are they? How come they're not taking down eBay?
Because see, so so you're
It's
making
a security or it's not. What is it?
You're making Eric's point. You're making
I know
Eric's
I'm
point.
making Eric's point.
His point is that it's actually not clear that the Howey test isn't even the Howey test is subjective.
Stop. When it comes to my Tom Seaver, Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And everybody else's Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Reggie Jackson, whoever, who's been listing it on eBay since eBay launched in 1996. How come there isn't a single case brought against eBay and the people that are selling those baseball cards since eBay was launched? Where were they, Your Honor? Where were they, Your Honor?
I got it. It's because the principle behind eBay's sort of enabling trade, blah, 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 does not have the same impact that it could, that what we're doing in the blockchain space could have on the.
Why not? All I got to do is mail it to the guy. The only difference in blockchain is that I can zap it to you within seconds across a blockchain.
Yeah. It's because if they allow, and I can't speak to the SEC specifically. I think the SEC is dragging its feet separately for separate reasons.
Because let me tell you why they're dragging their feet.
Why?
They're not going to make new laws for crypto tokens.
Because?
Just because they're made out of cryptography. Okay? That requires a bill on the Hill. I'm just a bill on the Hill.
Yeah.
And then it's got to go to the House. And by the time it gets to the Senate, it's something else. It'll get stuck in legislation for, it ain't making it past this term because we've got midterms coming up. It's political, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It costs too much money, right? And the SEC wants crypto under existing legislation, right? Existing legislation is two things: Securities Act of 1933, Securities Exchange Act of 1934, right?
Yeah. I think that they're just kicking the can down the road, in that when it comes to not institutional, but things like energy, like when blockchain gets adopted in industries that really impact like the economy in a massive way, they're going to be forced to have to deal with this.
Well, let me give you a current real world example.
Okay.
Let's say I hold 1,000 shares of restricted stock of ABC company.
Yeah.
Right? I have a share certificate. It's got a number on it. It's signed by the CEO and the CFO, right? And the name of the transfer agent is on it. And on the back of it, there's a red legend that says these securities have not been registered under the Securities and Exchange Act Securities Act of 1933, and may not be transferred without an exemption from registration or registration.
Right.
So now what happens is this. If I've held it for the requisite period of time that allows me to sell it, right?
Yeah.
I don't go to the SEC for a legal opinion.
Yeah.
They tell me when I can sell it. I hire a lawyer, or the company's counsel, the issuer's counsel usually renders an opinion. So you send the certificate to the lawyer along with the contract, original contract, which you bought them with, subscription agreement, whatever it was, right? And they read it and they examine it and they write an opinion. Based upon an examination, these securities were purchased, represented by certificate number, blah, 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 right? Were purchased on such and such a date. I've examined the original purchase subscription agreement, and it meets the eligibility requirements to be sold under the volume and manner of sale limitations of Rule 144. That is a legal opinion. Then that's delivered to the transfer agent, who takes the legend off the back, de-wax it to your account, and delivers it to the other side upon sale.
Yeah.
Right?
It
So
sounds.
it's the lawyer that renders the legal opinion, not the SEC. The SEC ain't giving you shit.
Right.
Nothing, nada. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, that makes the case for what Sam Bankman-Friedman was trying to say, in terms of it's maybe we should even be thinking about tokenizing equities. And he was giving the example of what happened with AMC and GameStop more recently, in terms of how there was this battle between retail traders and institutional traders, and hedge funds, I should say. But basically his point was making around the number of middlemen that are involved in just a single trade and settlement, and the number of different entities. In his blog post, he goes through like 15 different entities that it takes to just actually, especially if you did it through, like Robinhood, because they have a whole bunch of middlemen, which is why you're able to trade for free.
Yeah. So an
right?
example of this.
Yeah.
I enter an order to buy 1,000 shares of XYZ.
Yeah.
With my broker. My broker might be Morgan Stanley, but
Yeah.
Morgan Stanley doesn't make a market in the stock. So they
No.
have to buy it from E-Trade or another market maker in the security, right?
Yeah.
So now what happens is you have a back-to-back market maker trade. So MSCO versus ETRD, right? Because they have acronyms, right? So that trade has to settle now. What happens is then it's placed, the sale order is placed in my account, and then they deliver it to whoever E-Trade clears through, and E-Trade, I believe, clears their own, right? I think E-Trade is Morgan Stanley now, so that's a bad example, but let's say it's not, right? And then what happens then? Now you got banks involved, because if I want the money, I got to request the money. And now Morgan Stanley has to call their agent bank, of course, enter a wire information.
Yeah.
Right? And their bank then wires me the money.
Yeah.
But if,
and they're all taking little cuts along the way. And it's also further complicated by these front running trades and these dark pools and these, that's why it ends up being what you described was maybe 5 entities. It's actually 15, to just settle a trade, because what high frequency trading and the digitization of the whole infrastructure has done has enabled, more people in the middle, to more entities in the middle.
There's less of a number of people in the middle because you have DTC. DTC is the Federal Reserve of all custodial book entry shares of stock, right?
Yeah.
So custodians have an account and are a member of DTC. DTC owns the shares for the benefit of Morgan Stanley.
Right.
Credit with them, which is held for my benefit, right? So you've got 3 legal property rights that are affected, right? I'm the last line, right? I'm the last in line. So high frequency trading really involves the movement of shares at DTC from one side of the ledger to another, right?
Yeah.
And also at the clearing firm from one side of a ledger to another, right?
Yeah.
Now, can both ledgers be reconciled? DTC, custodian, my account, right? If I custody with the same firm that's executing these orders, right? Because I, the high frequency trading firm, I don't execute the order, I route the order for execution to a market center, right?
Yeah.
So, and then you've got market communication through FIX, Financial Information Exchange, which is a syntax that is a machine readable trade communication across the world. It's a standard. That's a standard. FIX is a standard, right? So it depends upon what kind of trade you're doing, which will result in the number of intermediaries that play a role in a trade. But in crypto, I can trade on Uniswap and it's address, contract, address. And that's it, right?
So I'm assuming you agree in principle with obviously this notion of reducing the middlemen, and the fact that blockchain enables that. But what came out of that discussion as well was this idea of like how much disclosure, and how much disclosure makes sense. In the internet world, obviously terms and conditions have been sort of the standard that people, that the industries have agreed to, but there's also the not acknowledgement that people don't read terms and conditions. So has this model of terms and conditions as disclosure become, does it have any value? And then also,
it does. It does. I'm going to tell you how it has value.
Okay, hang on one second. I want you to answer, but let me just add this to it, and you can sort of add this to the thought. Erik's thought was, yes, terms and conditions are kind of like disclosure theater, but he was also saying that, hey, people aren't stupid, retail investors aren't stupid, and that they should be responsible for doing due diligence on their own. And so, yes, companies should have some responsibility for disclosure, but so should citizens.
So it's true. They're not stupid. They're just in a hurry, right?
Yeah.
Which makes them careless and ignorant. They're allowed to be ignorant. They're allowed to be careless. There's no law that prohibits a human being from being careless and or ignorant or in a hurry, right? So as far as disclosure, that's a very broad term.
Yeah.
Terms and conditions sounds like the terms and conditions of the use of a thing.
Right. Use of the platform, use of the exchange.
Correct. But in crypto, we're not only dealing with the utility of a thing, you're dealing with the value of the thing as well.
Yeah.
It carries a value. So disclosure then becomes more subjective, right? Because
Right.
you have value and you have utility, right?
Yeah.
So in my own humble opinion, if there is value and someone is motivated by the value, in addition to the utility, they should be warned about the risks, right?
Yeah.
However, if they're going to use the thing, well, then maybe a degree of financial disclosure of the entity that issued the thing would also be appropriate.
Yeah.
Like if I decide I want to buy $500,000 worth of XYZ protocol.
Yeah.
Now, unless that protocol is widely decentralized, like Bitcoin is, and Bitcoin is the only, in my humble opinion, is the only truly decentralized headless horseman on the planet, right? Blockchain. Yeah. Ethereum, not so much.
Not so much.
Right? And then when you build on Ethereum, the issuers of the meta token, the token that sits on top of Ethereum,
Layer
which
2.
is subject to a smart contract, which is controlled by an owner who has a key, which they can turn the key to turn off the pause the contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
The basic standard functions of an ERC-20 token contract is ownable, pausable, burnable, mintable, right? Who does the minting? Who does the minting?
So the platform or the protocol.
Well, you can trigger the mint, a call to mint by another contract. Somebody has that contract, right? Somebody has that contract. They may have programmed it to mint tokens through a call to mint by that contract. We have that, right?
Right.
So, and then there's pause. Pause is controversial. Pausing the contract, which means freezing any and all transfers from taking place in the contract, right?
So do all protocols have the ability to do that?
Smart contracts are ownable, pausable, mintable, and ownable, right? Right?
So all of those Ethereum, all those tokens that have been built on Ethereum have that ability to be pausable?
Correct. That's right. You don't have to activate that feature.
Okay.
You don't have to activate.
But you should probably give disclosure.
Yes. The problem is that ordinary people who are careless, ignorant, and in a hurry are not going to read the GitHub code that was deployed as the contract on the Ethereum network, right? That you've got to be a developer to even understand that, right? You have to know Solidity to understand that. So you have to speak in plain English, right? The token contract hereby resides in this repository. Its features are ownable, pausable, burnable, what else was it? Mintable. Mintable, right. Some of them have a cap, right? Humans program these contracts.
Right.
A human deploys the contract to the blockchain, right? So the SEC can take the position that at worst case, is a transfer agent, which is required to be registered with the SEC. Transfer agents are gatekeepers.
Yeah.
So
I think that the challenge becomes like, if there is no central organization, then who is responsible for disclosure?
Well, now, so that's a really good question. If to the extent that a protocol, be it a layer, can't call it a layer one. There are tools for layer ones where, like Dune Analytics, is a tool you can use. Chainalysis or Cipher are tools you can use to trace value, but the internet itself does not make a disclosure.
Right.
Only the companies that build on top of the internet make disclosures, right? Terms and conditions. But if you're using if it sits on top of a blockchain, right?
Yeah.
And a project that is controlled by a group of people, right? That group of people probably raise money to build that project.
Right.
And this is where the SEC principally has some merit. If you are relying on a group of people, first of all, how much money you got left? If I'm going to buy your token to use on this network because I like the utility and I want to hold some of the tokens now, it's early before everybody else gloms them, well, then I want to know how much runway you've got. How long are you going to last before you either have to raise additional money or before the revenue that you may collect or a piece of it or whatever is enough to continue to fund your operations. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to know how much money, not that it's, I mean, Microsoft is gigantic, but if I buy a Windows machine, is Microsoft going to be around to support it?
Right.
Guy's going to be around to support this transferable software license that I just bought from you or that I bought off of an exchange, right?
Yeah.
So there are concepts and principles that should be considered, right?
Yeah, for driving.
In this day and age, look, you can deploy a contract, you can list it on an exchange within a few days, you can pull the rug, and people are not going to know. People are going to get victimized.
Yeah.
Right? But if you submit to some sort of protocol like what we have, where you're submitting the ability to articulate and express your financial state with a bare minimum of a balance sheet, which shows the buyers and traders of the transferable utility how much money we got left, well, then the question is, when are they going to earn enough money so they're going to have to raise more money? Are they selling the tokens to me, right? And if they're selling them to me while I'm buying them on the exchange because they're on the offer selling them, that I'd like to know that. I'd like to know that, right? So
I think that's actually, that makes me think about, and let me know if I'm sort of off track on this, but this notion of consumer protection is usually around, is at least one of the elements is around making sure that people have some way to get recourse, or there is somebody to sue or somebody to go after should I have been wrongfully either scammed or feel like I've been wronged.
let me ask you a question.
Let me finish my thought though. Let me finish my thought, otherwise I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose the thought. So that's an element of consumer protection. But when you're dealing with decentralized organizations, you don't have that head, like you said. And if I think about the Ripple and what Shapeshifter just did, like Ripple, the SEC is going after the founders, right? But because there's somebody to identify. With what Shapeshifter just did by morphing to a DAO, and essentially he said, I think his ownership of Shapeshifter has gone down to like 5% or something, but it's essentially owned by the community. So there isn't a person to go after, or even the entity itself now no longer is governed by corporate laws, in my understanding. That's an issue, don't you think? Like, if in the context of consumer protections?
The answer to your question is yes, but then does the internet itself render terms and conditions that you must agree to?
So the market,
itself, right? Does the air around me that carries the sound of my voice say, wait a minute, before you use this air, here are the terms and conditions of the use of the air. Now that might be a little bit ridiculous, but
You're essentially saying the market can decide.
The market can decide, but there should be some sort of disclosure.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm going to ask you the question.
Okay.
Do you think Procter & Gamble will ever become a programmable DAO one day? Strike that. Strike that. Do you think Procter & Gamble will become a DAO?
Do I think Procter & Gamble will become a DAO?
Yes.
Now, this tests my understanding of DAOs. So what I've understood is that the community essentially governs the organization. That when you're a DAO, you aren't a corporation, at least in the way we know corporations to behave. That the users of the product, service, etc., make decisions and then there's like a framework for how much weight you might have in a decision. I don't know. Have I picked up on some of the elements of how you think of DAOs?
Who's going to ship the bounty? Who's going to ship the toilet paper?
Yeah, like somebody has to manage the
Who owns the trucks that ship that toilet paper? Who knows that the correct amount of what's being shipped is correct? My point is this. Corporations, for so long as they are staffed by executives, must abide by rules and regulations, right?
Yeah.
The first one is the existence of the principal and the agent. Who is the principal? Who is the agent, right?
Yeah.
So if I am Procter & Gamble, let's say I'm the CIO or CTO or CFO of Procter & Gamble, and I want to use a blockchain. What am I going to use it for first, right? I may use it only to lay down proofs.
Yeah, like these.
But if I want additional functionality, I need somebody that I can reach across the table and strangle.
Yeah.
You didn't do this right. Or I need somebody that I can sue in a specific jurisdiction, which was agreed to in advance in a contract.
Yeah.
Right? So just food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think Procter & Gamble is a very challenging example. I think there are multiple ways that Procter & Gamble can leverage blockchain technology, but around the notion of becoming a DAO.
No, because they're not a service company. They sell physical things, right? I
think supply chain, I think tracking the ingredients of products, they should be leveraging blockchain in multiple ways, but this notion of a DAO is very interesting. I think it might not apply to offline businesses, like maybe digital first businesses might be more open to that governance structure. Like Shapeshifter makes sense because they're not delivering a product that needs to kind of like, a hard offline product, but it's an interesting combo.
Yeah.
I wanted to, so thank you. That I think people should really read both blog posts. I think there's a lot of meat in there. And for folks who are just sort of educating themselves on the blockchain space, they're both really sort of good pieces to kind of just orient yourself around sort of philosophical battles that companies are having to sort of deal with and contend with. And then it's interesting to hear from Jason, who's been in this space for a long time, hear what the the believer's point of view really is. Folks, we'd love to hear your comments, love to hear your feedback, both on what these gentlemen said and what Jason's point of view was, you know, so definitely comment in if you're watching us on YouTube, and we'd love to hear from you. If you're watching us, if you're listening to this in audio, thanks again for joining us, and we will be back with another episode. So thank you. And thanks,
Thanks for
Jason.
having me.